Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm your host, Alan Moore, and I'm excited to have XYPN member Meg Bartelt, founder of Flow Financial Planning, back on the show today. We had Meg on after her first year in business to talk about her journey. So it was exciting to have her back on 2 years later to really talk about her first 3 years in business. Meg is extremely open and transparent about her business and her personal life and gives one of the most raw and authentic looks into the life of an entrepreneur. In our first interview, we talked a lot about the importance of self-care, and that theme really carried into this interview as well. Meg talked about why she has a business coach, a marriage therapist, and an individual therapist, and how she manages her stress and keeps it from overtaking her. We talked about what has worked for her from a marketing perspective, given that she runs a hyper-niche virtual-based practice. Her path is one that showcases the power of a niche and the power of content marketing, and how you can truly build a business that supports your great life. I'm honored to have people like Meg who are willing to come on the show and share their real insights and story into how she runs her business. So people thinking about starting or in the middle of their journey have something to really compare and anchor their business off of. This is an interview that will speak to pretty much any listener, so definitely enjoy it. We're an open book here at XY Planning Network. That's why we're giving you an inside look at our company through our Year 5 annual report. This report is your chance to learn more about Team XYPN, see what our 5th year in business looked like, and take a behind-the-scenes look at our stats, get a sneak peek of what's to come, and more. Download your copy at xyplanningnetwork.com/annual report. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/208. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN radio listeners. It's the community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Meg. Hey, Meg, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you for accepting my invitation to be on the show again, Alan.
I love it when people invite themselves onto the show because it makes it easier for us to pick who we should be reaching out to for the show. So that is the secret to getting on XYPN Radio is email
Just
Kelly.
ask.
Email myself or Kelly. So, as usual, most important thing is to learn how to say people's names. And unlike when I gave you an award at XYPN 16, is not Meg Bartlett, is Meg Bartelt. So if no one takes anything away from this, do not call Meg Bartlett or she will own you.
I'll correct you, but I'm pretty accustomed to the mistake.
So thank you for coming on the show. This was sort of preempted or sort of came out of hitting 3 years in the business. So congratulations on a massive achievement and accomplishment. That's such a huge milestone.
Yay, thank you. It is.
One of the guilty, I think most of us as business owners are guilty of not stopping and celebrating some of those milestones and saying like, yeah, I'm a year in, I'm 3 years in, I'm 5 years, whatever it is. And just saying like, wow, I made it. I'm here. I'm still alive. I'm making some money. And so anyway, so you had emailed and want to go through basically, we haven't had you on since episode 105. So if anyone wants Meg's full career backstory, understand who the woman is that is on this podcast and how she got to her 1 year mark, xyplanningnetwork.com/105. We will not rehash the career story. We're just going to dig into, let's see, I was pulling up that date. So that would have been June 2017. So yeah, literally 2 years ago, you were right at 1 year. You thought things were like going the right direction, had a cool niche. You weren't going to shut down, but a lot has changed. So let's just jump in. So overall, let's just say, where are things today in the business in terms of sort of clients, revenue, and how that compares to the last time you were on the show?
Sure. Well, handily, you guys made me do some of this research ahead of time, which was very helpful. So my year 3 revenue was $163,000, and that is year 3 ended April 30th of this year.
So you are not good at vanity numbers because everyone says run rates at this phase. They're like, oh, it's 250 because it's going to be 250. You actually made 160 over the last 12 months.
Yes. So year 1 was, I more or less broke even year 1. I think I had $29,000 in revenue for year one. Year two is about double that, maybe 55 in revenue. And then year three was 163. So the year two to year three revenue really jumped. That's when I really hit my stride with reaching my target market.
Yeah. And, last year, I think was the first year we had in the opening keynote at XYPN Live. So 18, we showed sort of progression on average of income. And, everyone saw the year one and sometimes, year one revenue on average was like $5,000. And, and it sort of gets you in the stomach because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to make any money my first year, which you obviously crushed, 5Xing that. But in the grand scheme of things, like the difference between 5,000 and 25,000 is not the difference in whether or not your business is going to survive. That is not paying the bills.
I didn't take anything home, even though I did much better with my revenue.
Made more, spent more. That's sort of the reality. But your revenue has grown pretty substantially over time and really in line with what we've seen, that really going into year three, if I remember right, I had to pull it up, it was around 170,000, I feel like, going into year three. So you are tracking higher in year one, but really tracking that growth rate and growth trend that we see from folks. So what are you projecting then? Did 160 this year? What are you projecting for the next 12 months?
Yeah, so I did look at my revenue for April. So just annualizing April, I'm beyond, where is that stupid thing? I was at 19,300 for revenue for April.
And you're charging quarterly, right? So oh, no, you're charging that monthly.
Yeah. So If you multiply by 12, that's basically 230,000 if you annualize that.
See, this is how Michael and I do math. He says 19 times 12, and I'm like, that's like 300. It'll be fine.
I like 300 better, but unfortunately, that's not the actual math.
So that's your run rate. Have you done projections around if you continue to grow at the rate that you're growing, where you'll be?
I have done that recently, not for the sake of this podcast, but because my business coach encouraged me to, because I am starting the process of hiring my first associate advisor. And I'm targeting hiring someone in September. So my coach suggested that I basically run all these projections sort of from worst case to best case scenario in terms of client growth, to sort of see if I get no new clients after I hire the associate advisor, what's my profit going to be? Or, if I manage to triple my growth now that I have an advisor, what would it be? So I don't really have those numbers in front of me, but yeah, I am up until this point, I've been growing, as I think I mentioned before, one new client a month, just because I can't figure out how to grow more quickly than that and maintain my sanity level. And not work more than 40 hours a week. So that's really the driving force behind hiring the associate advisor, that, hey, maybe that'll allow me to onboard 2 new clients a month. Wouldn't that be nice? And because my minimum fee is $5,000 a year, that could pretty quickly pay the full cost of an associate advisor.
Yeah, and while your minimum fee is $5,000, it frees you up to go find an $8,000 or $10,000 client as well. So it really does speed up the opportunity. So there is so much we can talk about. I mean, the last 24 months, if you think about where you were, and I encourage listeners to do the same, especially if you have a business or even just in your career in general. Like if you just stop, close your eyes for a second, and think where you were 2 years ago. How many clients did you have? What was your revenue? Or if you haven't yet started a business, where were you in your career? What did you not know that you have learned? It's amazing how far we can come and how different of people that we are, which it's a good exercise just to sort of see and be able to appreciate the journey a little bit.
That's why I know that you're aware of the fact that I for my second year anniversary and for my third, I did write a post on my public facing blog, sort of a retrospective on the business up until that point, sort of a snapshot of the basic metrics. And that is sort of a forcing function to me to make me do that reflection. Yeah.
And so folks can go to flowfp.com. I Googled like third year Meg Bartelt and it popped up, but it's 3 years of flow. So if you want to go read those, and I love them because again, it is a good way that, over time, this will be a really cool thing to be able to look back on sort of year over year where things were. So let's just talk about some of the things that have changed over the last 2 years, because, when you were on 2 years ago, really you seem you were focusing executive women in tech.
No, you got that wrong
like
last time. It's
see, and that's what I'm wondering. Did it broaden? Did it narrow? Or I just got it completely wrong this whole time?
It's not completely wrong. Just strike the executive
Such
part
a
of it.
good word. It makes it sound so fancy.
I know, and it really it's so much more common because executives, they have all that money. No, my target market since like month 6 has been early to mid-career women in tech.
You did have a focus on moms early on, is that correct? And that was a bit of the transition that had probably already happened last time you were on that sort of saw a bit of an evolution there. So are you still, what percentage of your client base fit into the women in tech, definition of your, target market?
95%.
Okay. So what would you credit the fact that you've been able to keep, the vast majority of your clients in that niche? I mean, what is it? Do you just tell people, no, you're not a woman in tech, so I'm not going to work with you? Or are they really the only ones showing up?
A mix of both, I'd say. I do occasionally have men who work in tech say, hey, do you work with men? And I say, yes, actually, I do work with men. So I do have some male clients who are, not just husbands of my female clients. My marketing is very targeted to tech and women in tech specifically. So if you're a lawyer, for example, aside from being a lawyer at a tech firm, and I do in fact have a client, a woman who is a lawyer at tech firms. But if you're outside of that niche, my marketing is not going to be all that appealing to you. So it does effectively filter out the prospective clients pretty well. And then occasionally through some other channel, I will get someone reaching out to me. I actually just had some sort of old neighbor here in Bellingham reach out to me to do some planning for him. And I said, you know what? I don't think I'm the right planner for you, so let me pass you along to actually another XYPN planner who's here in Bellingham. So it's a combination of both of them, but to the vast extent, only people who are in my target market reach out to me because it's super clear who my target market is.
Yeah. And they say great marketing should repel more people than it attracts. And that's really the point of it, right? Is that you don't end up with all of these people in your office that you're talking to that aren't a good fit because, by the time they get through your website, they see your marketing, they hear the message, they see the message. It's pretty clear. Like I said, like they're showing up knowing that you're a good fit. And that's why they're showing up. So yes, it filters out people who are not a good fit, but then it increases the rate at which people call you because those people who are a good fit are going to call you versus your run-of-the-mill generic CFP down the road who works with individuals and families and everyone else. So let's talk about the overall marketing that has worked because you clearly have a niche, but a niche is not enough. You have to be able to get in front of these clients. So where have you found the most success, whether it be short-term or long-term that in terms of marketing channels that has effectively converted clients, coming in your door that are a good fit?
Yeah, I don't think this has really changed since the last time we spoke. It's just the results just had time to compound, which is I have a more or less weekly blog at this point with a sign up for people so they can get the weekly email push of the blog posts. And that's my primary marketing effort is writing this blog and then pushing it out either via the newsletter or in various Facebook groups targeted at women in tech. In these Facebook groups targeted at women in tech, I do interact with people there. Occasionally they'll have questions and I'll give sort of, educational answers there, sometimes linking to my blog. Those are the two primary things I do now, honestly. The one thing that's been added since we spoke 2 years ago is that there is a very prominent women in tech conference called the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing or something long like that. It is an annual conference. Last year it had 20,000 attendees. So it flip-flops between Orlando and Houston because I think there's only 2 cities in this country that can actually accommodate a conference with 20,000 people. And I have spoken there the previous 2 years, and I've been accepted to speak again this year. So that is, I think of that more as like a long-term marketing play. I don't know if I've gotten a client yet directly from that, but it certainly gives me a lot of exposure, to my distilled target market.
So, truly, like blogging has been effective for you. And would you, before you started blogging, would you have considered yourself a great, a good, an average writer? Like how would you rate your own writing skills?
Much better than average, possibly not great.
That's not a range. And the reason I asked, now you had a writing background before you started into financial planning. Is that right? Didn't you did tech writing?
I did. So I knew how to write and how to sort of structure my writing in a way that is good for sort of modern content consumption, short sentences, short paragraphs, bulleted lists, chunk things up, blah, blah, blah. So that was a skill set I had coming in. I think what the skill that I really developed over the course of the last 3 years was just finding a voice, finding my voice, being unafraid of using my voice, and figuring out which topics were really going to resonate. It has gotten to the point where I simply write about topics that I find my clients encountering themselves. And if my clients are encountering it, so are other women in tech. And I regularly get responses to my email push from, maybe it's just one person, but saying, oh my goodness, so great. I'm going through this right now. So I do get regular feedback that I am hitting the right topics.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those that the reason I asked you how you would rate your writing skills is many of us are self-conscious about our writing skills or lack thereof. And wonder, well, can I really be a blogger? Do I need to be a professional writer to be able to blog effectively? And I think the answer is no, because I think the challenge is not so much in your writing skills. I mean, run things through Grammarly, like, don't look like an idiot. But it's more about knowing what to say and who you're saying it to. And I think that's the part that you've gotten right. Obviously, I'm a fan of the niche, which is why we're all here. But you know who you're talking to, and you're not writing another Roth IRA, a difference between a Roth and a traditional, like, yay. And who is this for? Well, all young professionals with a 401k. You can be super specific on the post that you're writing and who it's targeted for.
Yeah. I mean, I've had many XYPN members reach out to me about content marketing and blogging just because they know that this is a thing I do and I've done it successfully. And one of the things I always say is I've got a natural advantage in that I like writing and I'm good at it, but I like writing, which means setting aside time to do this. That's not a sacrifice for me. Like when I'm stressed out about the rest of my work or can't bring myself to do this spreadsheet or whatever anymore, I will take a break by writing a blog post. So that's an advantage I have.
But like you said, one of the best ways to find content is to just listen to the questions your clients and your prospective clients are asking. Because again, if one's willing to ask you, there's 100 that are not. But people are asking this new website called Google these questions. And if your answers are findable on Google and they see that, you specialize in working with, clients in their situation, they're going to call, they're going to reach out.
Yeah, it was crazy the first time I got a prospect meeting request. And, I've got a question on the form when they request a meeting. How did you hear about me? And they just said, Google search. And I was like, damn.
We made it all this time.
Yeah, that was bonkers. Like, I don't expect to be found just by Googling a topic and, in a browser, because good Lord, there's a lot of content on Google.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it is better when they're, like, oh, I found you on the internet. Like, oh, that's great. Could you be more specific?
Yeah, well,
I'm trying to optimize keyword searches here. So it sounds like that has been a bulk of your clients coming in. Have you done other, women in tech, local meetups or events or anything else, or it really has been, inbound marketing?
Yeah, it's been all inbound just because my target market doesn't live where I do. I run a virtual practice. There aren't really other options. So thankfully, this has worked. I mean, the first year, if you listen to the first podcast, the first year sucked in large part because it sucks for everyone, but also because this whole inbound marketing, content marketing, virtual thing just takes longer to get momentum. But then once it started getting momentum, it's pretty easy to feed, right? Because all your existing stuff is still out there. You're just building on it incrementally. So
I
don't
do
put a lot of effort into it at this point.
I do think that it's a good way of framing the fact that marketing, sometimes you talk about the difference between marketing and prospecting, and, prospecting generally being something that's a one-time thing where you go to an event, you either meet people or you do not. If you do, maybe one, calls you. But in the end, 6 months later, no one is going back and somehow searching that event for your content or you. They're not going to go back and find you. That's a one-hit thing. And it can lead to clients much more immediately because you can go there, you can find a client, you can get someone to become a paying client. But longer term, marketing is something that it's building this growing brand, this growing base of findable content, searchable education that they can go and find 6 months, 3 years, 5 years later. They can be searching and go find something that you wrote that long ago.
And it's such a great marketing avenue for people who don't like sales. You had some guy on the podcast just a few weeks ago who built his business on cold calling, and it even blew you away. I forget what his name was.
Emlyn. Oh
no, it wasn't Emlyn.
Oh, it wasn't. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyways, but and he crushed it doing cold calling, and I remember sort of like cringing the entire time I was listening to this call, realizing that if I had to go out there and do quote unquote, capital S sales, this would never have happened.
Me neither.
This is sort of a coward's way out. Or like, I'm just going to put out lots of valuable content, and then maybe eventually someone will ask me about it, and I'm just going to sit here in the corner until they do.
I appreciate that our version of marketing is coward marketing to you. I love that. Maybe it was Sydney Devine that I had on.
Yes.
Yep. So Sydney. Yeah, I'm built the same way you are, that, every now and then, even at XY, we still only, quote unquote, have two people that do sales. I mean, despite we've had pretty rapid growth and we only had one for a long time. Now we have two. And it's because the entire personality of our marketing and sales build initially was driven by the fact that I was never going to call someone who did not want me to call them. It was just never going to happen. And yeah, it's, you got to know yourself and you got to know what works. If you put me, I can start cold calling people to join XY and I will not find anyone in 6 months. That just, it will not happen. But we have a marketing, content machine similar to what you have, where it's around a target and you go find it. So I think it's awesome to see. But to your point, it feels a little bit slower because it's not, you post 3 blog posts, get 3 clients. It's not how it works. And content you wrote 3 years ago is just now starting to pay dividends because content builds on content from a search perspective and a credibility perspective and all of that. So, and for people who think that's a little crazy. I mean, a blog post that I wrote on Kitsis.com back in 2013 about the technology I was using in my practice, we still get emails about that blog post on, hey, saw this post. Have you updated any of the tech? And I'm like, oh boy, we're going to have to sit down and talk, man. It's been 6 years.
Yeah, I was listening to the most recent XYPN podcast with, forget a lot first name, but Michelle Smallenberger. And, her and her husband's revenue numbers for the first 2 years were amazing. And of course, I'm listening to that thinking, oh my God, I'm so lame. I'm not even there yet in my 3rd year. But part of the problem is she runs a more local practice. And that's, I think maybe this is just justifying my own inadequacies, but it's easier to get going if you're able to shake people's hands.
I agree with that. I think it sort of depends on, what natural marketplace you already have. I think there are some folks who will ultimately start a business and they already have this sort of natural network that know millions of women in tech, and then they start a business serving women in tech, and it's almost like shaking hands. You started knowing the industry, but you didn't have a list of 100 people who were ready to sign up.
Yes, possibly if I had still been living in San Francisco when I did this, my first year would have blown it out of the park also.
Yeah, that's fair. It is a good way of looking at it. And also for folks who are thinking about starting a purely virtual business, recognize that the growth rate may be a little slower. That's not a bad thing. I still believe that one of the greatest myths of entrepreneurship and running a business is that there is a single right answer. That, I should build a virtual based business or I should meet with my clients in person. And it's like, look, don't shit on yourself. Just answer the question, what do you need for you and your lifestyle so that you can live your great life? And then focus on that and build around that. And that's what you've done. Maybe it was slower, maybe it was faster than some others, but in the end, you've built, I assume, and you can tell me this, but I assume you've built the business that you needed to build or that you wanted to build that supported your lifestyle and what you were hoping for.
Yeah, it's getting there. The lifestyle thing could still use some improvement, but I think my major accomplishment there is that I don't work more than 40 hours a week.
Yeah, talk to me about the lifestyle stuff. So what do you feel like, what are you still working towards achieving from a lifestyle perspective so that you can sort of be where you hope to be and really why you started out and started a business in the first place?
Yeah, the biggest challenge personally for me right now is stress management. Even though I only work about 40 hours a week, and it does wax and wane, of course, but I just have a pretty elevated level of stress most of the time. And just figuring out how to deal with that. Do I need to make changes to the structure of the business, how I manage my personal time? I've already got therapists out the wazoo, so I don't think I need like a third therapist on that front. So yeah, that is something that I am honestly sort of continually struggling with, is how to manage this stress, which, I acknowledge is part just, running a young business is stressful for everyone. And part of it's probably just my personality of borrowing trouble from the future.
Yeah. How do you manage stress? I mean, when things get tough, what is your outlet, bourbon aside, to really?
I'm no Dave Grant. I do not medicate with bourbon. Well, I try. I have to admit, I'm not great when the stress builds up. I'm not great at dispelling it at that point. I'm much better avoiding it to begin with. And that's a, daily regimen of exercise, of only working the 40 hours a week, of trying not to look at screens after dinner before bedtime. Recently started carving out 2 hours just for myself on the weekends, because I also have a husband and 2 young kids. And one of the things that was happening is that I'd only work 40 hours, but it was like 40 intense heads down hours. And then I'd walk across the backyard, because my home office is a detached office. I'd walk across the backyard and 30 seconds later be in the middle of my family, which is a good thing, but like I had no time for just Meg. A couple of things I'm trying to do now is, as soon as I go inside, just lock myself in my bedroom with a glass of wine and a book, because I really missed reading. Reading is really important to me. So if I just get 15 minutes of reading, it's sort of miraculous how that affects my stress level for the rest of the evening. And then carving out 2 hours for myself on the weekends, because it's such a struggle to get time to myself for myself between having kids and a business.
Yeah, self-care is so important, and having the awareness to be able to sort of feel your stress, that is a learned skill. That is not something we are just naturally born with. To be able to sense like, okay, I am feeling extra stressed, like what is causing this stress? And like I said, some people love commuting because they love the 20-minute drive home and the disconnect. That is not something I ever struggled with, but I certainly take work home in my head. And so how do you build for yourself a way of separating work from home life and be able to give yourself that permission to relax? And again, recognizing that maybe it's a book and a glass of wine and that's really all it takes. But also, I think you hit on a really great point, is not feeling guilty about taking time for yourself. You and I were talking about this. I wasn't sure if I should say this because I'm sure that this will be judged, but my wife and I last week took a vacation, just the 2 of us, for 5-6 days. We went to Mexico without our 10-month-old or 4.5-year-old. And I am certain some people saw pictures. And as you asked earlier, like, where the heck was your baby? And the answer was not with us, thank goodness, because that's what we needed to recharge. It's hard to do that. You have dad or mom guilt. You have, leaving your partner even for just a couple of hours, much less a day or a weekend, is so hard, but it is so important to be able to do those things for yourself and for your relationship, because you do have to take care of yourself, or ultimately we all hit a breaking point.
Yeah, and I still have a long way to go on that. The idea of leaving my children behind and going somewhere fun with my husband is amazing, and I'm actually mentally jotting that down to figure out where can we dump the children for 5 days.
Care.com. That's the answer. Someone on there. Or as Scott Gill, our senior compliance consultant, says, Disney cruises are the bomb, because they just take your kids away, they whisk them away, and you don't see them all week, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I've had other parents recommend that also, actually.
So parenting 101. No. And, it is hard. And, we struggle a little bit like, oh, we're leaving the kid. Like, oh, we miss her. But in the end, we're better parents when we take time for ourselves and take time for each other and keep our relationship strong versus it being all about the kids. And whether you are a parent or not, the business is a baby as well. And, it is a responsibility and you have to change its diaper and you have to do all, and it's always there and you can't ignore it, no matter what you want to do. And recognizing that there are times that you just need to let it go, turn it off for a bit, walk away from it, reset, come back, and you'll be a better business owner for it.
Yep. That's the theory.
That's the goal, right? Sounds great in theory. So you mentioned earlier 2 therapists. So can you explain that?
Sure. My husband and I have been going to a marriage counselor for about 4 years now. And just a couple months ago, I started working with my own individual therapist, mostly around just stress and anxiety issues. So it's sort of still in that experimental phase, whether this particular therapist fits with me or not. But I am trying to just build in structure really on a weekly basis of, in addition to that wine and book every night and 2 hours on the weekend, what kind of explicit care am I going to give to myself? Is it going to be a massage or a mental health appointment every week, basically?
What made you decide, individual therapy versus just, marriage therapy, which obviously husband's involved? Like what ultimately drove that decision?
I guess I didn't want to take up couple time with stuff that was mostly my issue of anxiety. I mean, like some of my anxiety and stress comes from my marriage, sure, but it also comes from this business and, and other elements of my life. And I needed to develop better skills around processing any source of stress for myself. Whereas the marriage counseling is, it's obviously more targeted on the marriage part of things.
And the point I think that's really important to note is, recognize just like financial planning, therapy is not just for people who feel broken, who are in a broken relationship or have hit rock bottom. Therapy is very much a learning opportunity to learn how to manage stress before it becomes a problem, learn how to manage communication in a relationship before it becomes a problem. So for listeners that are out there, I know, anytime someone mentions therapist or anything like that, the media is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're talking about therapy. But it's like, this is just like talking about having a financial planner. This is just, this is financial planning for your emotions, essentially, in your relationship. So I appreciate you being willing to share the fact that you have 2 therapists, because that is an investment in yourself that will have enormous ROI. It can be hard, especially when you're first starting the business, to spend money there because it feels optional, but it's really not.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate that. I mean, at least in the circles I run in, quote unquote, admitting that you use a therapist, see a therapist, is just becoming less and less notable. It's like, yeah, I got a therapist, no big deal.
Do you see that in financial planning or primarily just in your personal network?
I see it a lot with women whom I know either professionally or personally. Women seem to be, at least a lot more ready to admit that they use a therapist. I have no idea about the actual numbers of usage, but I think it's also, a generational thing. I mean, I'm 43, so I'm Gen X, and I assume every subsequent generation is just going to be a little more comfortable with sharing that. I mean, it's really just sort of a commentary on you're being really smart. You're taking advantage of all the tools out there to make you the best person you can be.
Try to decide what direction to go, because there's so many things we can talk about with the remaining time. One of the other things that you mentioned in the blog post for your 3-year wrap up, if you will, was the study groups that you're involved in. So we are huge proponents of study groups, but like therapists, you tend to collect them. So, which is an awesome thing. So tell me about the study groups that you're involved in, why you're involved in multiple, and sort of the purpose each of them solve.
Yeah, I think the study groups are a really great example of a larger phenomenon, which is you need different things at different stages of business growth. And in the study group situation in particular, I have joined and left several study groups, not because they were bad people or I didn't like them. They just stopped serving my purpose. They once did serve my purpose. Of course, I had a launcher group when I first joined XYPN, and it was great for 6 months. And then we all sort of went in different enough direction that there wasn't usefulness to a lot of us anymore. So that dissolved. And then a little while later, I joined another XYPN study group targeted at advisors who are about to hire their first employee. And so we're all more or less at the same stage of business growth at that point also. And that lasted for about a year. And then again, same thing sort of happened. Like there were enough, the differences in, I don't know if it was even personality, but sort of business direction and philosophy and all of that became big enough that I just wasn't getting much value out of it anymore. So I stopped that. And currently I participate in one sort of technically oriented study group that I actually started myself. It happens to be all XYPN members, all around stock compensation. And I started this last summer because I knew sort of more than your average bear about stock compensation. It's obviously very important to my target market, but I wanted to really make sure I knew all there was to know about stock compensation. I wanted to go through a course of study, go through a book. We actually end up using the mystockoptions.com website as our course of study and invited people to join that. And we meet more or less every Friday, but that is focused around honing our technical skills.
Weekly on a specific technical topic. That is intense.
There's a lot out there.
Yeah, RSUs, they're just so easy. It's just like, what? No big deal. Say that website again for the stock option education.
It's mystockoptions.com.
Because that is a question that we've gotten, that I've gotten before. I'm just like, where do you go learn this stuff? Because it's like, do you just have to have them to learn it? So it's nice to see there are more educational and sounds like pretty technical resources coming out. Because I think you fit in, you are serving a niche market that I think you're borderline on this one, but sometimes people say like, oh, that's not really a niche. That's just a marketing persona. Like there's no difference with women in tech. It's just, you're just serving them. You just say women in tech and women in tech see that and they sign up. It's not really different. But the reality is there are two major differences. One, women in tech has its own emotional and career issues and harassment and all of the things that I'm assuming that you're helping your clients with. But also just tech in general is a very unique beast of stock options and layer, when you've been at 3 different companies and having all of this complexity. So I guess maybe my question should be how much of that expertise do you feel like you need to be at your best? Is it really just, anyone can do this work. It's just, you just say women in tech, or is the reality like, 1,000 times more about stock options and compensation plans than I do. Therefore you are a better advisor for these clients than I am.
Yeah. So on that last question, I am absolutely a better advisor than most people out there for people in people in general in the tech world, purely because of my technical knowledge. Stock compensation, I think, is a bit like student loans. And I hesitate on that because I don't actually know all that much about student loans. But it is a topic that you can't really scratch the surface of. There's just so much there, so many corner cases, so many gotchas, so many nuances that you really need to dedicate yourself to its study to give the best advice. Now, I had a head start because I worked in the tech industry and personally had these issues to learn about. So that was my head start. And then I've dedicated, obviously, a significant amount of time to learning more. And then, of course, with every client, I have to learn a little bit more about, variations on the theme, because this one works for Facebook, and here's how Facebook's RSUs work. Or, trading windows at Amazon do this weird thing, or in this startup, So I also learn a ton just from the work I do with my clients. And so that's the most obvious example of technical expertise, of the whole stock compensation category. But I also find that, for example, 401ks, at least at the major tech companies, tend to be pretty tech forward, pretty employee forward. Like one of the things I started seeing earlier this year, maybe late last year, was a bunch of the major tech companies allowing you not only to make after-tax contributions to your 401k, which, okay, I've seen a lot of companies do that, but then they will automatically convert your after-tax 401k contributions to the Roth bucket. That sort of weirded me out, but from my client's perspective, that's awesome, right? And that might exist in other industries, but I think in major tech companies, that sort of innovation is going to be more common. So it's even those smaller things that you just sort of pick up on if you work with enough people in tech. And then when it comes to the women in tech thing, yeah, I mean, I didn't invent women in tech, right? I mean, it's huge. Their entire conference is dedicated to it because there is an acknowledgement that being a woman in tech is simply different culturally, professionally, and even financially because different financially because of the professional and cultural differences than being a man in tech or, being, any sort of underrepresented person in the tech industry is just going to be different. So, different communication styles might work better with those clients, or just an acknowledgement like, yeah, it's freaking hard being you in your job. I get that. And sometimes simply that acknowledgement, that empathy is sort of all clients want.
Are you doing much work on the, I guess, allyship or advocacy side for your clients, whether it comes to, negotiating raises or looking at career paths and that sort of thing? Like, is that a pretty big part of your planning process with these women?
I would not characterize it as pretty big. It is a regular part of my work with my clients, but I do not consider myself in any way a career coach. So I don't know how to teach someone how to negotiate. That's just not a skill I have. I have cultivated a few career coaches who work with maybe not exclusively women in tech, but women in tech would fall, very easily in their wheelhouse. So I oftentimes refer my clients to career coaches because I can identify this is a thing that would really benefit you as a woman in tech to negotiate or just to look at what career paths are open to you and what you want to do and how to get there. So again, that's another one of those. I think Scott Frank just recently described it as I'm the librarian, not the library. So I can, career coaches are part of the library. And so I can just send my clients to, those particular books, as it were.
Scott Frank has a gift for
like metaphor or analogy
metaphors.
Or something.
Yeah. He'd come up with anything and Scott can come up with an awesome metaphor off the cuff. I love it.
Yeah, it was very useful.
And like you said, knowing, piggybacking on that metaphor, I mean, knowing where the book is 90% of the battle, right? It's got that you got to have the book on the shelf and you got to be able to find it when you need it, but you don't have to have every single word memorized. You just got to know enough.
And I will say that in the sort of the initial planning and then the annual renewal meetings I have with my clients, career growth is always a goal. And, maybe they're totally content in what they're doing now. They don't want to make any changes, and that's fine. But I will at least bring up the topic, ask them about it. What are you doing in terms of networking? What are you doing in terms of professional development, growing your skills? And I'm not there to tell them you need to be doing this, that, or the other, but I at least want to make them think about it, at least once a year. If their employee benefits include professional development budgets, I'll bring that up. Like, hey, you've got $1,000 a year from your company for professional development. What do you think you might do with that this year? So again, it's pretty high level. It's mostly just bringing it to the conscious fore to make them think about it. It also has a little bit to do with, encouraging them to, hey, if you want to spend X dollars on some professional development instead of saving X dollars, totally cool with that. Really good investment. I give you my blessing as your financial planner.
Which is, I think, another area of differentiation. The CFP program teaches us how to save money and avoid risk. It doesn't teach us how to take money and invest in businesses or invest in ourselves and create a bigger income stream. So I think those are huge differentiators in terms of the planning process that your clients are going through.
Yeah, and I got to say, and this is something that my business coach has been telling me for a long time, but I had to sort of learn it for myself, which is my clients are my best teachers, right? I mean, the CFP was a great foundational education, and my goodness, is it inadequate to serve my clients.
And that's it's not, you're right. You're not done when you're done with the CFP. That's just a starting point. But it also, I will say, just because it's inadequate in this instance doesn't mean you don't do it. You still have to have those foundational pieces, but you have to go further and you have to keep learning.
Exactly. And the best way to figure out what you're going to spend your resources, your time and money learning is going to be best dictated by what kind of clients you're working with. What would benefit them the most? For me, it's learning all about stock compensation. And, I signed up for the George Kinder 2-day pre-con for, get a little life planning mojo going on.
Yeah, so that's in reference to XYPN Live 2019. We'll be in St. Louis. And yeah, we have George Kinder doing his 2-day training as a pre-conference. I'll be surprised if that thing doesn't sell out because it has been really, really popular. Again, shout out to Scott Frank, who has been pushing me for the last 2 years to have George come host. So I'm super excited about that. Switching gears just a little bit, you talked about that you have made the decision coming up to September that you're going to hire. Tell me about when that conversation started and sort of what maybe sparked the original, concept of maybe I should hire, and then how you've become comfortable with the idea of hiring both financially as well as letting go of some tasks and such.
Well, sort of the whole hiring history is about 1.5 years in. I think actually during our first podcast, I was saying, I think in a couple months, I'm going to hire, some part-time Jill of all trades. I probably just need her for 5 hours a week. And I remember you saying, I bet you in a year, that person's going to be full-time. And it wasn't quite that fast, but so I did hire a woman who actually, she works at a fintech company actually down the Bay Area, and she still works for them. But she sort of she's interested in financial planning. So her name is Sarah, and she's been working with me on a very part-time basis since then. So, coming up in 2 years this fall. And at first she really was just a Jill of all trades because I didn't know specifically what kind of help I needed. I was just sort of drowning. And then in March of 2018, so this was almost 2 years in, I hired an administrative assistant about half-time, maybe 15 to 20 hours a week. Her name's Janice. And just this past March, so about a year after I hired her part-time, I made her full-time. So Flo is now me. Janice was a full-time client services associate, and Sarah transitioned into a sort of a paraplanner role where she wasn't doing administrative stuff, but she was doing data entry, drafting the first plan, walking me through, Right Capital, creating spreadsheets for me, that sort of thing. And the business has been growing the whole time. And as I mentioned, I've only been taking on one new client a month, and that's been the case for quite a while now. And I am just turning away interested prospects left and right. And that bugs me. I mean, I'm very happy that I have colleagues whom I feel very good directing these prospects to. So I know these prospects are going to get good advice, and I feel happy to support my colleagues. But on the other hand, it'd be great if I could actually work with these people also. And so I was toying around with do I want to partner with someone? Do I want to hire an associate advisor? Should I focus on raising everyone's rates first so I can have more money? And I've been noodling on this for, 3 months or something, and sort of stressing me out. And I just didn't know what the right answer was. And then my subconscious mind just decided, no, I'm just going to hire an associate advisor full-time. And yes, it'll be a knock to my take-home pay, but revenue is still continuing to grow. And especially if the advisor can help me double my growth rate, at least in terms of number of clients, not percentages, then it'll pay for itself very quickly. And it's an investment in the future of the business. And I'll say in here that I started, JD Bruce does this mentorship through his firm Abacus. And I'm in this sort of the second cohort, or maybe it's the third. And we started in February. And so one of the things that he focuses on is sort of growth barriers and when to hire certain roles in your firm. And so that's really prompted me to think a little more explicitly about whom do I need to hire to get to where I want to be in the firm. And I'd really like to have more advisor capacity. That's not going to be me working more or harder. That's going to be me hiring someone, training them to be an advisor who can be a lead advisor someday, maybe in a couple of years or something. But so I made that decision, and then it felt like the right decision. And now it's just a matter of writing the job description, figuring out proper compensation, and really sort of a career path for that person. it'll probably be some hybrid of Angie Herber's Diamond Team, which is like, all right, for the first 2 years, the associate advisor is nothing but a student, right? It's not really a net win in terms of your time because you're spending so much time teaching them. Like, that's great for a firm of Abacus's size, but I actually need some leverage right now. So it'll be some part of that, because I do want whoever I hire to ramp up to being a lead advisor, someone who can, get their own clients. Some of that, but also some of just, hey, can you just do this work for me instead so that I can work with more clients myself in the meantime?
So you talked about a couple of things I want to highlight. So one being, you said you've been turning prospects away. Are these people who fit your niche market and you just can't take them on because you just don't have capacity?
Yes.
So this is something you and I have talked about in the past that, I've had advisors either in conversations or on the podcast are like, oh, I onboard 2 clients a week. And I've, you've emailed me before and been like, what the heck? How are they doing that?
And what am I doing wrong?
They must be lying. But I think some of that has to do with probably your intensive process as well as the fact that you're holding yourself to 40 hours a week and that sort of thing. But, it's really interesting to look at the fact that, you did say 1 a month. Does that mean you're on a wait list if you have all these people coming in? Like, are you actually waitlisting clients at this point?
Yes. So currently I have clients signed out through December, which is bonkers to me that people are willing to wait for more than half a year. I mean, my ego loves it, but it's still bonkers to me. And I am starting to sort of double book, which is to say 2 new clients per month in the fall, because I'm banking on having an associate advisor at that point.
The other thing that I want to highlight is something that is difficult, especially for solo business owners, is the time when you go to hire your first or second or third person. It feels like the money is coming straight out of your pocket, because in the end it is. I mean, in the end, you make $250,000, you pay someone $50,000, you are spending that $50,000. And it is such a challenge, such a hurdle for folks to get over at times. And so for the listeners, one of my encouragements is to put yourself on a salary. Figure out, what do you need out of the business to pay your bills, to be successful, and literally every 2 weeks or once a month, whatever you want to do, run payroll for yourself and distribute that money. And whatever comes to you is your salary, and you can spend it. And whatever is in the business gets reinvested in the business. And when, if you're paying yourself $10,000 a month and that month you made $11,000, great, you've got $1,000. But as you grow and that $1,000 becomes $2,000, $5,000, $6,000, it's like, okay, great. Now we're going to go, now I can go higher. And for us, what we did at XY was we just sort of know our profit margin based on number of members. So every 30 members, we hire someone. That's just our number. So it gets me away from feeling like, oh, I'm hiring this person, I'm paying this much, this is out of my pocket, I could save that money and make that money. It's like, no, I get a salary as quote unquote CEO. And so I get my compensation, and everything after that is the business's money to grow the business and do what the business needs to do. And sometimes that, I think that framing helps to just sort of make it easier to spend the money to invest in the business, because a lot of advisors do choke the growth from their business because they're not willing to reinvest, because they're like, oh, but I'll just get this money out at the end of the quarter and I can take a vacation. And it's like, well, if you want to run it like a business, you just can't.
Yeah. I have a couple thoughts along that line. I did this tax year convert from an LLC taxed as a pass-through to an LLC taxed as an S-corp. So I went on payroll, and it is pretty cool because now I have a salary as opposed to just sort of deciding when to distribute cash.
Which can be really stressful.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this. As you mentioned, like now there's structure to it now. And that helps make other decisions and makes, projections and just the arithmetic easier. And also, Michael Kitces long ago, I think it might have even been one of your guys' mailbag episodes, and I submitted a question like, how many new clients can people take on per month? Because 3 drives me insane. Like, I'm such a stress case. And he made this comment, I mean, it was a quote, more businesses die from indigestion than from starvation, which is to say, businesses that grow too quickly are more likely to die than businesses that grow too slowly. And I've been hanging on to that like a life raft. Like, I'm totally doing the right thing by only growing by 1 client a month, even though I see all these people growing by like multiples of that every month. And so there's always this tug of, am I just being too conservative and risk averse? Because that's kind of who I am. And so I feel as if I've held on to that conservative approach long enough, and I'm just going to take the next step. Like, I'm not going bonkers. But, I'll hope to take on 2 new clients a month now if I have an associate advisor.
Yeah, I think that is from the book Scaling Up potentially. But yeah, it's something we've talked a lot about where, it's like, hey, we could roll out this new thing and we could blow up our business in the process because it could grow too fast. So like, how do you have enough cash to actually manage growth and be comfortable and do things the right way? I guess transitioning just a little bit, if you look back over your last 2 years, you have learned a ton. There's no doubt. So if we can just hit some of the highlights on things you want to be sure listeners take away, what are some of the things you've learned over the last 2 years that, would have been really helpful to know starting out and maybe some mistakes you've made that you feel like listeners could avoid by hearing your story?
Yeah, I think the overarching lesson for me is you're going to hear all this great advice and absolutely listen to it, take it in, make mental note, and almost none of it actually applies to you right now. But it will eventually, and then you're like, oh, that totally makes sense. What she said is actually true. I wasn't ready for it before, and it would have been a mistake for me to hire someone earlier or to add this tech tool earlier or something. You have to get to whatever it is on your own, like at your own pace. But I have always felt overwhelmed by all the well-intended advice out there. And then when I sort of very belatedly implement the advice because it's the right time for me, I'm like, oh, see, it feels right to implement it now. It didn't feel right before. And I'm glad I listened to that fear effectively. So that's reassuring for me, and I hope for other people to know that, yeah, of course, there's always going to be this fire hose of information, of philosophies or perspectives or things you could be doing. Take it all in and just know that most of it just isn't appropriate for you to implement right now. And so you do end up sort of iterating on your business constantly. Usually it's tiny little iterations like, oh, I'm going to go tweak that text expander snippet to use this language instead. Or to link to this website instead, or add, and you do enough of those tiny iterations, and a year later, your business is like entirely different.
Yeah, I love that advice because, to your point, well-intentioned advice, and I am one that is certainly guilty of giving it, of saying, "Oh, have you thought about this? What about this?" And it is one of those. Everything is good for a time, and so sometimes you just have to say, "Hey, that's right for you. That may or may not be right for my business," and evaluate it, think about it, and if it's not right for you, don't shit on yourself. Right? It's okay. You can always operate. You can always grab that later and implement it at a later date.
Yeah, and I don't wish that people didn't give me that advice. My business coach has said many things to me over the 2.5 years we've been working together that a year later, I was like, that thing you told me? I think that makes sense now. She's like, oh, okay, great. Let's work on it now. But it's just sort of throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks in the moment.
So what else? What other takeaways have you had from your first couple of years now that you feel were really valuable learning or hard learning lessons that you've had to go through?
Oh, it always comes back to self-care, which I'm not going to beat into the ground anymore because I did in the first podcast and earlier in this podcast. But number one, far and away and above, time away, take care of yourself physically and mentally. And just that your evolving needs in the business, right? I mean, study groups were a great example of that. My launcher group is no longer appropriate for me 3 years in, but it was absolutely perfect for me at the time. And just recognize that things serve a purpose for a time. And when they stop serving a purpose, you can abandon them. But, do what is needful in the moment. Because it's this constant evolution. I mean, oh my God, I had no idea how to run a business and it still seems overwhelming. But if I compare my business knowledge, which I've accrued, iteratively or, incrementally rather over the last 3 years, I know so much more about running a business now than I did 3 years ago. But man, was it overwhelming at every step of the way.
Yeah, I think we take for granted that it's just running a business and financial planning is the hard part. And the reality is financial planning is the easy part. Running a business is hard, especially when you are smaller and you're doing the work and running the business. I'll say that has been the advantage of growing through the fact that I no longer do the work and run the business. Honestly, at XY, I haven't done a lot of the work in a really long time. it is one of the advantages of growth is that you can sort of pick, do you want to do the work or do you want to run the business? And, but when you're smaller, you have to do both. And if it's just you do it all, including, cleaning the toilets. So, welcome to entrepreneurship. But I do think it's important to recognize and listeners have hopefully heard me say this over and over again, that entrepreneurship, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. And we want to give the real view of that it is stressful. There is a need for self-care, not because, it's just such a beautiful life being an entrepreneur, but because it's hard. And we have to take care of ourselves. Otherwise we will burn out and lose perspective and not make it. But recognizing that this is a tough journey, it's a journey. You tell me what you think. It's a journey I'm glad I undertook. I'm glad I'm doing it, but it doesn't mean it's an easy path.
Oh my gosh. It is the most challenging thing I have ever done. And I include parenthood in that.
Whew.
Yeah.
You got better kids than I'm just kidding. No, my kids are great.
Well,
I don't know about that. It is a lot like parenting. I find it to be. Yeah, it is. It's a fun ride, but again, hopefully absolutely worth it. So any closing thoughts or anything else you want to leave listeners with as you've sort of closed the books on year 3, looking forward to year 4 and hope folks can take away from your journey as they're either starting or in the middle of their journey?
I think it's something you said earlier in the podcast about taking a moment to reflect on everything you've learned and accomplished. When I reflect on how much more I know about everything, I know so much more about all things stock compensation. I know so much more about how to communicate effectively with clients, how to write emails, how to write meeting notes, how to use these tech tools, how to run a business, what Washington State wants me to pay in employee taxes. It's pretty mind-boggling. It makes me feel very smart.
and in another 2 years, you'll look back and go, I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Now I know how to manage people. Because that will be have you ever managed in a full-time capacity before?
Well, my client services associate is full-time. Yeah, but but also the kind of work she does is very compartmentalized, right? I think when the associate advisor comes on, that's going to be a much more interactive management style.
Yeah, learning how to manage, I'll say, has been one of my greatest challenges and continues to be one of my greatest challenges is just learning how to be and hopefully learning how to become a great manager because it's so critical and that'll be the next fun learning experience for you to continue to iterate on. So not to scare you.
Thanks.
So Meg, thank you so much for reaching out and making this happen and coming on the show and being vulnerable and transparent about all the things that you're working on and the successes and the challenges that you've had in your first couple of years and looking forward to the next couple of successful years. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Alan.
We're an open book here at XY Planning Network. That's why we're giving you an inside look at our company through our Year 5 annual report. This report is your chance to learn more about Team XYPN, see what our 5th year in business looked like, and take a behind-the-scenes look at our stats, get a sneak peek of what's to come, and more. Download your copy at xyplanningnetwork.com/annual report. Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.